Woolworths boss Brad Banducci threatened with jail as he appears before a Senate inquiry. The share market tumbles, wiping out 3 months' worth of gains, and millions of workers could soon be allowed to double their leave entitlement by taking half-pay holidays. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Wednesday, the 17th of April, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, after the show, you have an interview coming up today with Jonathan Miller, who is the Managing Director of Kraken Australia.
I sure do. The Bitcoin halving is due to occur in the next couple of days. Now, we asked Jonathan to explain to us what Bitcoin halving means, what blockchain means, what mining for Bitcoins means. It is a great interview. He put it as close to plain English, I think, as I've heard anyone put it, in terms of what's happening with this Bitcoin halving, what it means for the value of Bitcoin. I kind of got to say there was a bit of a light bulb moment for me because I've never really understood cryptos and Bitcoin, but there's a light bulb moment for me about the inherent value of Bitcoin, which has always been the bit that's tricked me. So certainly if you're an investor, if you're interested in Bitcoin, if you're interested in asset classes, well worth a listen. In fact, I'd almost go must listen on this one, Michael.
I would say it's definitely a must listen. And I know it's an audio medium, but you can actually hear that light bulb moment in your voice, the moment where it suddenly all makes sense.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, it is worth a listen. It's coming up after the show. And also very quickly, today's Wednesday, which means there is a newsletter coming out today, the Fear and Greed newsletter, which comes out every Wednesday. If you have not signed up already, there is still time. It costs nothing. Head along to fearandgreed.com.au and pop your email address in and you'll get it mid-morning.
Yeah, plenty in it. Bit to say about what's going on in the Middle East, about the 10 Bruce Lerman case, about Star Entertainment, a bit to say about the grocery guys, the market, all that sort of thing. Plenty going on.
We should almost kind of rename it. It's not Fear and Greed's newsletter anymore. It's Aylmer Unleashed.
Oh, oh dear. Moving on.
Oh dear, indeed. All right, the main story this morning. Woolworths boss Brad Banducci was threatened with jail over his refusal to divulge the supermarket giant's return on equity in a fiery appearance before a Senate hearing yesterday.
It was Green Senator Nick McKim who was spoiling for a brawl up against the outgoing Banducci, and the question was fairly simple. What is Woolies' return on equity? Now, that's sort of net income divided by shareholder equity. It's a very, very standard measure in finance. All companies have a return on equity. Banducci's response was that Woolies doesn't focus on that measure, instead preferring to think about return on investment, what it gets back from what it invests. According to media reports, the same question, or a version of it, was asked about 10 times, and Banducci kept avoiding it. Eventually, McKim said the committee wasn't interested in the Woolies boss BSing, although he said bullshitting, but we don't use that term here on Fear and Greed. The Woolies boss BSing his way through hearings threatening contempt, including up to 6 months in prison. Banducci, he sort of partly relented, saying he didn't actually know what the return on equity was because Woolies looks at return on investment, but he would take the question on notice. To which McKim asked how a CEO wouldn't know his company's return on equity. A fair point, I'd say.
Now, I presume that Brad Banducci won't be going to jail. What actually is, I'll ask you the same question, what is Woolworths' return on equity and why all the fuss, Sean?
Well, I mean, I agree. I don't think Brad Banducci will be going to jail, but it was a good moment for the media. Woolies' return on equity is about 26%. That is very high. It's about twice the level of the major banks, or even a bit more than that. It's well above the average return on equity of the ASX 200 listed companies, and a very good argument for those who say the supermarket giants are profiteering. Later in the day, Coles boss Lee Weckert appeared. She said her company's return on equity was 31%, even higher. In the case of Woolies, it is clearly a figure it does not like to highlight because it gives plenty of ammunition to its detractors. Mr. Banducci otherwise did a pretty good job of holding off questions from senators. He said Woolies and Coles' profit margins were lower than 3%, less than $3 in every $100 spent. He claimed that Woolies is not banking land. In fact, Woolies doesn't own any land it doesn't already plan to use for a store. Ms. Weckert said Coles' rate of expansion has been modest compared to competitors, and the company did not bank land either. Mr. Banducci said small suppliers were paid within 14 days, but there's still work to do in engaging constructively with them. Ms. Weckert said Coles has about 8,000 suppliers and completes 17 million transactions every week. She said the suppliers like Coles, so she agreed that more could still be done. All in all, apart from the fact that Senator McKim came out and said you could be in contempt here and end up in jail, apart from that, the supermarket chiefs did a fairly good job, I would say, yesterday.
Unfortunately, it is slightly overshadowed by that jail line, isn't it?
It's a great line. I mean, for a CEO of a company, and he just ardently refused to say what the return on equity was, and that is a really basic financial construct. Now, maybe supermarkets don't think of it that way, but still, he said he didn't know it, so you have to take him at his word. So I'm sure he didn't know it and he'd taken on notice, but it just is a surprise that a CEO doesn't know return on equity for the company.
And somebody dodging a question is just like, that's like a red rag to a senator, isn't it, in one of those inquiries?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It didn't help the PR look. Like in the end, it is a high return on equity, but the supermarkets have those. It just looks bad that Woolies' boss, who's actually leaving the business in the next couple of months, he's just trying to avoid the question. And in a sense, the PR around it and the fact that we're talking about, jail-free CEO, which that's not going to happen, clearly. But the fact that we're talking about it, that's the problem with what happened yesterday.
All right. How did local markets perform yesterday?
Poorly. In fact, it was among the worst day this year, and most of the gains in 2024 were lost yesterday. By the close, the S&P ASX 200 finished down 1.8% to 7,613 points. Where to start? Sea of red? No, we won't start there, Michael.
Oh, too late. You've already done it. I love it that you just kind of put that out there and then take it back knowing that you were just getting it on the record. So well done.
About 90% of stocks went backwards yesterday. That is a very broad sell-off. And many of them dropped. In fact, I'd say most of them dropped by more than 1%. The reason? Fears that interest rates will stay higher for longer as inflation still needs to be contained. Worries about geopolitical risks, such as the potential for an outbreak of war in the Middle East, a push to more risk-free assets, such as bonds and away from equities, and the fact that the market has run so hard this year. Plenty of market watchers said it's actually run too far. It needed to be corrected. That's what was going on yesterday. The interest rate sensitive stocks were sold off on growing expectations that rates will stay higher for longer. That hurt the banks, with Commonwealth Bank, Westpac and ANZ closing down more than 2%. Iron ore prices were lower. That hit the big miners. Fortescue and Rio Tinto both fell 3%. BHP was off a couple of percent. Diversified miner South32 dropped close to 5%. Qantas was up 2.5%, while the big property groups, which are sensitive to interest rates, dropped sharply as well. Worst on the day was Star Entertainment Group. More on that shortly. Otherwise, the energy stocks tumbled, with Boss Energy and Strike Energy both off around 6.5%.
Okay, what about international markets?
Well, higher than expected retail data in the US dented hopes for a rate cut, sending bond yields higher and Wall Street much, much lower. Investors have now priced in 44 basis points worth of cuts this year. So let's try and translate that to English. It means they're confident about one 25 basis point cut, kind of confident, fairly confident about a second 25 basis point cut, but not fully confident. Now, remember, a few months ago, they had priced in confidently 6 rate cuts. The moves yesterday had repercussions across financial markets. Now, Wall Street fell, led lower by tech stocks. Plenty of volatility. In fact, the VIX index, which measures volatility, is at a record level for this year, and that's all around people just not really clear about what's going to happen next. The US dollar appreciated. That hit other currencies like the Aussie dollar. The Aussie fell to 64.08 US cents. That's a 5-month low. I would like hasten to add that I have no plans to go overseas to the US anytime soon. So whilst very upset for those going overseas, it's not going to affect me, so I'm less interested. And yeah, I mean, amazing what's going on. It's actually Fiji, interesting out of Fiji yesterday. The Central Bank and Monetary System Regulator said the use of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies on the South Pacific island is now illegal. The central bank's governors blamed social media for promoting dubious cryptocurrency investment schemes, so they've just outlawed it, which is fascinating. Of course, timing is interesting too, because the halving of Bitcoin is due in coming days.
Sean, can I ask you a question without notice? I know you love these. Your eyes light up.
Yeah.
How much assistance does Australia's central bank, the Reserve Bank, provide to the central banks of kind of smaller nations in our region in terms of kind of support, advice, kind of anything along those lines?
That's a really interesting question. So it's actually the International Monetary Fund that tends to provide advice to those second and third world central banks. So they will take an expert from our central bank or a retired officer from our Reserve Bank of Australia, for example, and ask them to go to another country and help and assist with their central bank around risk and governance and those sorts of things. So generally it goes through another party rather than directly from the Reserve Bank, from what I know. Now, of course, I'm sure there's a relationship between the Reserve Bank and the Central Bank of Fiji, but mostly these South Pacific nation, the IMF actually funds the help.
Imagine being a retired central banker and being asked to go and help out in Fiji for 6 months.
Well, Michael, my brother is a retired Reserve banker, and the only reason I know about this is that's what he's done.
You're kidding.
I'm not kidding. I thought you might be setting me up on this one.
I absolutely wasn't. No. And you should not have admitted this, because I was just here in awe of your knowledge going, wow, Sean knows everything.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't have a clue. It's just that I have a family member who that's what he has done.
Oh, the unstumpable Aylmer. I've realised what's going on here.
Yeah.
Oh, this is great. Aylmer Unleashed. Don't forget to sign up for that newsletter. It's coming out later on this morning, and we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the United States Embassy and consulates in Australia have warned US citizens to remain vigilant if travelling to Australia following the Bondi Junction attack that left 6 victims and the alleged attacker dead.
The alert told travellers to be aware of their surroundings, avoid demonstrations and areas with significant police activity, review their own personal security plan and stay alert. It came as another attack took place in Sydney. This time a 16-year-old with a knife attacked a bishop and parishioners at a Western Sydney church. It was declared a terrorist incident. People have also launched an investigation into a riot that erupted outside the church after the attack, which injured several police officers and forced paramedics to take shelter for several hours. As an aside, Michael, the courageous Frenchman who used a bollard to ward off the attacker in Bondi over the weekend, you might have seen him on social media, incredible courage. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and he was supported by opposition leader Peter Dutton, invited the Frenchman to stay as long as he wants after showing such courage. I think they're just a nice news story to come out of that tragedy.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, this is an interesting one, Sean. Millions of workers could soon have the right to double their annual leave by taking it at half pay as part of a new entitlement under consideration by the workplace umpire.
The Australian Council of Trade Unions and employer groups are close to consensus on introducing the right into industry awards to give staff and firms greater flexibility to allow for paid time off, according to a report in the Financial Review. Unions and employers have agreed that the right to request should rest with the employee rather than the employer, so the employer can't push employees to do it, but the employee can ask about it. The difference between the two sides at this stage is on safeguards, with employers pushing for full discretion to refuse staff requests and unions arguing for refusals to be based on a reasonableness criteria. But the two sides, I think, will get there. The Fair Work Act contemplates allowing workers to take annual leave at half pay. Few awards actually permit it. The Fair Work Commission is considering changes to better suit work and care responsibilities, including a right to request to work from home and expanding ordinary hours beyond the 9 to 5 for remote workers. I love this idea. I think one of the great benefits of COVID is the fact that we have far greater flexibility in the workplace, and this is an example of that.
Sean, we talked yesterday about Star Entertainment. This is a story that's just going to keep on giving for quite some time. Star Entertainment Group Special Manager Nicholas Weeks has told the Bell Inquiry he had an online meeting with then Chief Executive Robbie Cook around Christmas, New Year, where the casino boss indicated competitor Crown Resorts was being treated more favourably by its special managers in Victoria.
And it's great that both had special managers and one is jealous of the other because the other special manager is giving it a bit of time.
It's quite childish almost, isn't it?
Oh, my God. The Victorian Gambling and Casino Control Commission last month determined that Crown Resorts would be allowed to retain its Melbourne casino licence, but was on notice from the regulator that Victorians expect it to be run honestly and free of criminal influence. According to a report in The Australian, Mr. Weeks, the regulator overseeing the Star Entertainment Casino in Sydney, said Mr. Cook, the chief executive, made some observations that he felt that the special managers in Victoria in relation to Crown were more favourable to Crown, and he would have preferred that Mr. Weeks' report included some of that style of material. Star share price fell another 14% yesterday to 41.5 cents per share, an all-time low. Star might not make it. I have never thought that, but after the last couple of days, just what's come out, and we still have a way to go in this inquiry, I just think that Star could struggle to make it, Michael.
Yeah, it does feel like it's becoming increasingly challenging. Now, the Albanese government has established an Environmental Protection Authority, a pre-election promise, to oversee federal environmental approvals.
Its chief executive officer will have enforcement powers similar to those of the Australian Federal Police Commissioner. For the most serious breaches of federal environment law, the EPA would be able to seek fines of up to $780 million and 7-year jail terms. It would also have the powers to issue stop work orders on projects suspected of breaking the law and order businesses to ensure they're complying with the environmental law. The next part of the government's overhaul of laws, changes to the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, have been delayed, though. They may not be introduced until next year.
Now, Sean, the question that I'm sure you have been asking yourself frequently, what do we do with our free time? Well, fortunately, the Bureau of Statistics have they crunched the numbers, I suppose, on our free time. How do they even know what we're doing?
I suppose it's census data, isn't it?
I suppose so, but they've released data on how different generations occupy their spare time. Interwar generations have the most free time and watch the most TV, and Gen Zers are the gamers.
So the Bureau of Statistics looked at Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, woohoo, go the Gen Xers, Baby Boomers, and the interwar generation, basically over 75 years, and ranked them according to time spent in recreation and leisure activities. The data was collected during the pandemic when everyone had lots more spare time, I suppose. Millennials spent the least amount of time. Millennials, Michael, listen.
That's me. Yes, go on.
Spent the least amount of time in recreational activity.
We're a very serious bunch.
Very
Sean.
serious.
We like to work.
While the interwar generation spent the most. I suppose they're all retired. Across all generations, males recreated, if there's such a word, males recreated more than females. When it comes to gaming, a little close that one. When it comes to gaming, Gen Zers spend about 3 times gaming, more than Gen Xers, with millennials somewhere in between. Not surprisingly, males are much bigger gamers than females in terms of using the internet and devices. Millennials, that's you. Gen Xers, that's me. And baby boomers, they're all the same. But the older a person is, the more likely they are to read. Based on my household, that's fairly clear too. And Gen Xers and millennials are the least sporty people.
Well, to be fair, I've had a bit of a look at the data, and Gen X is the least sporty.
Well,
millennials are slightly better than
you're
that,
the
Sean.
one that went with your son Henry to the school Olympics and came last week. Michael, I'm just putting it out there.
It's not about the end result, Sean. It's about the spirit. That's what I told him.
What I said, the Gen Xers and the millennials are least sporty. The Gen Zers are sporty, or relatively outdoorish and sporty. So are the boomers and the interwar generation. Fantastic.
Really?
Yeah, there you go.
Oh.
More time, maybe.
You know what? You know who would love this kind of data? Simon Kustenmacher.
The great man himself.
One of our favourite demographers, which is funny that you can even have a category of favourite demographers.
One of our favourite. I only know two. I like them both.
Yeah, Mark McCrindle and Simon Kusenmacher.
That's exactly
They're both
right.
great. All right, moving on to international news now. Jeez, it doesn't take much to derail us, does it?
No. It's been a bad morning too here. You've spilt your coffee everywhere. I came into the studio with my ginger tea with the tea bag in, and it's not kind of easy to find anywhere to put the tea bag, so now my tea's overly strong, and it's just been a shambles.
They're really first world problems though, aren't they, Sean?
Yes. First world early morning problems.
Indeed they are. Now, China's economy grew faster than expected in the March quarter in the face of protracted weakness in the property sector and mounting local government debt.
It was a pretty good result. Gross domestic product grew 5.3% on an annualised basis in the January to March quarter, based on a year earlier. That's according to the National Bureau of Statistics in Beijing. It's comfortably above analysts' expectations of about a 4.6% increase. It was a little bit better than the December quarter. On a quarter-by-quarter basis, GDP grew 1.6% in the first quarter, which again was above growth forecasts, according to Reuters. The world's second largest economy has struggled to mount a strong and sustainable post-COVID bounce, burdened by a protracted property downturn. It just doesn't give up that one. Mounting local government debts and weak private sector spending, but some rare good news out of China yesterday.
And finally, Tesla is cutting its headcount by more than 10%, part of a global retrenchment extending all the way into its executive ranks as the manufacturer struggles with slowing demand for electric vehicles.
Chief Executive Elon Musk revealed the job cuts in an email to staff, citing duplication of roles and the need to reduce costs, according to Bloomberg. If the dismissals apply company-wide, they'd amount to more than 14,000 employees. Tesla reported a lower than expected number of vehicle deliveries last month. It ended last year with about 140,000 employees, almost double its total 3 years earlier. Of course, its share price is off about 35% this year.
Sean, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview. You are speaking with Jonathan Miller, Managing Director of Kraken Australia.
Yeah, I mean, apart from the name Kraken, which is just a great name, it's a crypto exchange, we talked to Jonathan all about cryptocurrencies, particularly Bitcoin halving, which we expect to see in the next few days. I've got to say it's a 101 though. Jonathan explains to me what Bitcoin halving actually means. And I think it was a great interview, only because I just learnt so much from him.
Yeah, it really was good. It's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And you know, Sean, today is also, and I've mentioned that it's Wednesday a number of times, and so there's the newsletter coming out. Sign up at our website, fearandgreed.com.au. But it's also, how do they afford that day?
What's on today?
Well, today, how do they afford that? Being our sister podcast that focuses on personal finance, I asked Canna Campbell, who is the co-host of the show, is a financial planner. I basically said, what would you do if you had a spare $1,000? Because $1,000 is a sum that most people can kind of get their hands on by selling stuff around the house or by doing a bit of overtime or something like that. If you had a spare $1,000, what would you do with it in terms of then looking at kind of the different investment options, paying off debt, savings, all that kind of thing?
I'd go on holidays.
Well, I'm sure you would, and you would do it just as the dollar drops, wouldn't you?
Yeah, true.
But anyway, you can find How Do They Afford That wherever you listen to podcasts. I'll put a link in today's show notes for that one as well. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Wednesday, the 17th of April, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.